All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Utah Historical Society's Perspectives Lecture Series. As 2025 marks the 80th anniversary at the end of World War II, tonight's lecture is part of a 6-part series that seeks to answer the question, what was Utah's World War II experience, by examining this topic from a variety of perspectives. Today's lecture examines how Utah became the cornerstone of a cornerstone, maybe not the cornerstone, a cornerstone of America's national defense during World War II. Due to its strategic inland location and vast open spaces, the state transformed into a hub for providing essential supplies, aircraft, and military training. This lecture will dive into the creation of Hill Air Force Base and Wendover Airfield, exploring how these two sites left a lasting legacy that continues to shape our state today. Presenting this perspective are two representatives from the respective historic locations. From Hill Aerospace Museum, we have Elisabeth, who is the operations manager for the Aerospace Heritage Foundation of Utah. She has over a decade of experience in public history, including working at Hill Aerospace Museum since 2020. Elisabeth previously served as the curator for the Hiram City Museum for 4 years, and she holds a bachelor's degree and master's degree in history from Utah State University. Go Aggies. From historic Wendover Airfield, we have Landon Wilkey, who has served as the museum curator for historic Wendover Airfield since 2019. He also serves as an advisor for the board of directors at the museum as well. Landon holds a bachelor's and master's degree in history from Utah State. Continue to go Aggies. His experience includes internships at the Brigham City Museum of Art and History, as well as the Merrill Kaiser Library Special Collections and Archives, as well as a volunteer intern and staff positions at the Hill Aerospace Museum. So these two know each other pretty well. I will now turn the time over to Elisabeth, who will present her part of the lecture, and then she will pass over to Landon, who will present his, and then we'll have time for an open Q&A at the end. So ladies and gentlemen, Elisabeth Crapper.
Hi guys. So I do have to say I did go to grad school with Landon, and it was a spectacular time, and I'm super glad that we get to come back here for 5-6 years later. And I also am noting that this is like changing the words that I say, and if it does, please laugh because I think it's funny. Okay, so with that said, I'm really excited to talk about tonight's topic, which highlights Utah and in the history of defense in World War II. Now, I have to admit that growing up here in Utah, if I was to think about Utah's history, I would think the word pioneer, I would think the words railroad. I would not think typically or stereotypically the word military defense. I wouldn't really think about Utah's history when it comes to that. And this is part of why it's been such a special experience to be able to work at the museum that I work at and get to work with the community that I work with, and be able to kind of highlight this because it really is quite an important cornerstone for our nation's defense. And it's a very exciting part of our story that has a really, really big impact on the economy and the community that's around us, especially for those of us who live here in Layton, Utah. I also recognize a couple of faces who've joined us at the museum for our summer program, so I have to wave at you guys, so thanks for being here. You guys are spectacular. Okay, so one of the questions that I really want to highlight here, it's not just like when I think about, we're going to sit here and I'm just going to lecture at you about the history of Hill Air Force Base. That sounds really boring. And in as much as I love the history of Hill Air Force Base, I want to make this a little bit engaging. I want to ask you guys a couple of questions. And I am inviting you guys, there will be points where I will invite you to please call out things at me and to engage with this, because this is definitely one of those things where we have a smaller group, and that's fun because it means we can engage a little more, we can discuss a little more, and then we'll obviously have time for questions at the end. So one of the main questions that I have heard, or that really kind of highlights or encapsulates one of the issues that I want to talk about today is, why would Utah even be strategically valuable? Why should we even care? What do you think?
Ogden is the hub railway. Union Pacific Railroad used to have a depot up there.
Ooh,
and
yes.
My dad was with Union Pacific. I'm sorry, they put a retainer in my mouth, so I got it.
That's okay. Thank you for talking.
And it was the hub. And from what I understand, in World War II, there was hundreds of trains going through there. Now we have, I believe it's 2 or 3 Amtrak trains a week coming through Salt Lake. They don't even go to Utah.
Absolutely. Okay, so Utah is significant, and we're going to come back to that word. The word hub is very important, so thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely, Ogden is a hub of transportation. Any other thoughts why Utah itself might be strategically significant? What do you think?
It's not near a coast.
Ooh, it's not near a coast. Why does the fact that it's not near a coast, why might that matter?
Because, like, for the same reason that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, like, it's not easily accessed.
Oh, exactly. It's not easily accessed, especially when we're thinking back 80 to 85 years in a world before when everything is easily accessible via flight. We're in the 1940s. We're right at like the precipice of beginning to jump into flight technology and the type of technologies that we have now. We are not going nearly as fast as we are now, right? So the fact that it's not accessible via the coast is super important. So that's a really good point. Any other thoughts on why Utah might be strategically significant? Yeah.
Lots of available public land.
Lots of land. Absolutely. Yes, and last one.
I was just going to say, it also was the reason that they put the camps in Delta, and the reason we had POWs here is because we were inland. They had a hard time to escape. They loved it here, the Italians and all those. And we had one down by down central Utah. I can't recall the name of the town, but we had POWs all over here. Plus, we also had the internment camps down near Delta.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not highlighting as much about the POWs this time, but that is absolutely something that plays a role there strategically in terms of being able to keep or have somewhere to put people that the federal government at that moment considered to be a risk. So as we go forward, I'm going to try to avoid utilizing a ton of military technical terms. I work with the military, I love them, they're fabulous, but they use a lot of technical terms. And I think that sometimes we get so caught up in terms that we forget about the meaning of those terms. But before we dig into that, I do want to highlight a couple of terms that I am going to talk about today. Number one is the word depot. A depot is in the terms of a military facility. It's an industrial military installation or complex that is meant for maintaining weapon systems. So when we're thinking about the word depot, I'm not talking about office depot because that's the word that I used to think of when I was thinking of the word depot. It is a specific term used in military installations, and I am going to refer to this word several times tonight. The other two words that I'm going to come back to, and I'm going to repeat them on accident and on purpose multiple times, are maintenance and overhaul. Maintenance is basically the practice of keeping mechanical equipment in good working order through a combination of activities like inspections, prevention services, and repairs, right? We all know what maintenance is on our cars. We all know that it's like one of those like, yeah, I have to take my car in for maintenance, right? It's one of those things that is just simply needed. We have to do it in order to keep things functioning, right? Overhaul, however, is an almost like a level up from maintenance. Overhaul is basically taking apart something, a piece of machinery or equipment, in order to completely examine it and completely redo it and put it back in brand new working order as often as possible. So these three words I'm going to come back to. The word depot, though, is historically a super important military word that we're going to come back to a couple times, and it relates to Landon. So I'm not going to steal Landon's thunder because his stuff is pretty cool. But, okay, so in terms of talking about why Utah is strategically significant, a lot of you guys have covered a lot of really important factors here, and a lot of it does have to do with geography and opportunity. So in terms of Utah's geography, we've covered a couple things. We know that Utah is inland, it's not on the coast. We know that it is, in terms of its location, there's a hub there, right? Location is super important. What else about Utah's geography is, or rather, what is Utah's geography like? Anybody want to tell me any thoughts? What's Utah's geography like? Mountains and canyons, good. What else?
Bordering on what she said, I was in the Air National Guard and I was in the Air Force for a while. We're good here because a lot of times when they're getting hit by hurricanes and tornadoes, Air Force planes will come here and land at our bases, and they move them out of harm's way. And so because we have mountains, I mean, we had the Salt Lake tornado, but they're very, very rare. They're very, and so it gives them an opportunity, so the Air Force doesn't lose all their F-16s, they don't lose all their C-130s or whatever plane it happens to be. They come here and then they go back when everything's picked up and when they can resume operation.
Excellent. You've got a good understanding. Absolutely. So the environment here, the fact that yes, we have mountains and canyons, but we also have this giant basin kingdom in the middle, right? This giant flat area that also is very high and dry. I want you guys to imagine, say we have a car sitting outside for, a year in Utah on, say, a plateau somewhere. And then we have a car in like the deep south in Louisiana sitting outside for a year. The amount of humidity that it would get exposed to there would drastically affect how the car would be able to handle for after a year, versus in Utah, that high dry environment also has an impact, right? And he mentioned that there are other bases that will bring their stuff here when they're in danger. And he's exactly right, because the environment, the geography, they all play a role in making Utah this kind of perfect spot. Not only that, but he also mentioned that Utah is super, super connected. It is the hub. So this picture right here, this map showcases between like the 1869, right? 1869, we're aware the Transcontinental Railroad meets in the middle up in Corinne, Utah, or close to Corinne, Utah. And then after that, there's all these railways that start to connect the country from sea to shining sea, right? And after that happens, this makes Utah literally what we call the hub of the West. In fact, I absolutely love, so first off, we've got this hubs and spokes right here. It's claiming or showing Utah on the map as the hub of the West. But this other picture over here on the left, you can't get anywhere without coming to Ogden. Utah and Ogden, the Ogden region, is literally the connecting place that is the hub of the West. And this is extremely strategically significant because yes, we are inland and we're connected to everywhere we need to be. In a moment in time where the United States needs to have quick access to the coast without being on the coast, right? Pearl Harbor happened, the American government, and it was well before Pearl Harbor that they're becoming aware of needing to have an air base somewhere. But they're aware of needing to be able to have quick access without having things be on the coast where they're easily accessible to military attack. So
Ogden still calls himself a junction city.
yes, they are. Yes. And I am a proud Ogdenite now. I used to not like it, but I love it now. Okay, so this geographical significance is something that a couple of people are very, very aware of in the 1930s. So this picture over here on the right, it is my right, yes, it is right, okay. This guy right here, his name is Lieutenant Colonel Hap Arnold. In the 1930s, Hap Arnold came through Utah working with the U.S. Army's, I don't want to utilize the terminology wrong. The U.S. Army was in charge of the airmail contracts for the federal government. If anybody knows anything about the history of airmail, it was kind of a colossal failure. There was lots of crashes. They had lots of planes that were not prepared for night flight or flying through multiple different regions, but the U.S. Army was in charge of the airmail contracts for a good number of years in the chunk of years in the 1930s. And as they were in charge of that, Hap Arnold was in charge of those contracts. And he came to Utah and saw the region. He gets accustomed to the region, gets accustomed to the geography. And later in the 1930s, he is in charge of looking for a space where the federal government's going to host an air base, an airfield, or basically just a plot of land that it can have an air base, something that can help the Army have an air base there. And he's looking specifically for something in the Rocky Mountain region. In walks the Ogden Chamber of Commerce, who are also very aware of Ogden's, its basically space as the hub of the West. And they, specifically and especially including Frank Browning. So if you guys have ever heard of Browning Firearms or are aware of anything about the history of the Browning family, they're very, very well connected with the history of Ogden. And Frank Browning kind of heads this effort with the Ogden City Chamber of Commerce to lobby the federal government and say, hey, Ogden is perfect for what you guys are looking for. It would be perfect for the Army to plot basically an air base there. Not only that, they purchased 3,000 acres of land right at the mouth of the Weber Canyon in order to basically say, hey, federal government, we could like give you this land and then you could also put an air base here. So it makes this a very, very easy decision for Hap Arnold and the United States Congress to say, yeah, that would be a really great spot for an air base. And especially as the United States is becoming more and more aware of its surroundings worldwide, right? The United States is becoming more and more aware that while there's certainly pushback on maybe joining any types of conflicts in Europe, they're becoming more and more aware by 1938 and 1939 that there is going to be, and there is with irrefutable conflict in Europe, and that whether or not the United States joins the war, they were aware that they needed to be strategically superior. They were aware that they needed to be ready. So in 1938, on November 26, FDR signs a bill that allots 55,000 acres of land, or sorry, $55,000. $55,000, not acres of land. So he allots $55,000 for the production of runways right at the mouth of Weber Canyon. So this map is a plot map that's showcasing the region. We can see the mountains on the edge. This is the 3,000 acres of land that was owned by the Ogden Chamber of Commerce, where they also started producing or building the runways. Also, the runways were built as a WPA project. So this is a Great Depression project. This is a way to give people jobs and get people kind of fostered and engaged in the community and get them back to work. So this right here on the left is a photo of the original $55,000 runways that were started being built in 1938. Within just a few years after that, the Chamber of Commerce officially gave that 3,000 acres over to the federal government, and they started building pretty quickly a maintenance and repair depot, which is right here. This is Hangar 1. Hangar 1 still exists on Hill Air Force Base today. It is actually one of the depots. Actually, I can't remember if it houses the fire station or if it houses the F-22 maintenance program, but it is still existent on Hill Air Force Base today. And it was placed there they broke ground on it in 1940, and they completed the construction of this building just as the United States enters the war. So we join the war, and very, very quickly, the war it's not just about getting men over to Europe and over into the Pacific. The war is also about parts. This is a war over basically repairs and parts for the United States. Because the United States has something that no other country has. They have resources and they have manpower, right? Or rather, we had resources and we had manpower, if I'm talking about the United States in terms of us. During World War II, if we were to compare just the production of aircraft between the United States and other countries of Europe and Asia, between Japan and Germany, they produced about, I want to say, like Japan produced about 71,000 aircraft over the course of World War II, and Germany was close to the same. The United States produced over 300,000 aircraft to supply the war. Now, most of the actual aircraft, most of the airplanes were not being built in Utah. They're being built in Detroit. They're being built on the East Coast, where automobile factories were being basically transformed over into airplane factories. But any time an airplane needed to be fixed, meaning it got bombed, it got hit, it got thrown a grenade, somebody threw a grenade at it, it got hit in any way, they were sending the majority of those key aircraft to Hill in order to maintain them and overhaul them. So, and this means that Hill becomes extremely important because we need to be able to turn those aircraft back out in order to get those men flying and fighting. So the motto of Hill Air Force Base during World War II was, we keep them flying and fighting. And that's still a very important kind of core motto of Hill today, or mission set of Hill today, that we are the ones who keep the men and women of the Air Force flying and fighting. We're the ones that keep them where they are. We keep the United States at the tip of the spear by being able to supply and maintain and overhaul all of these weapon systems. Now, this is also bringing in a massive workforce to the state of Utah. So much so that I would argue the entire state was basically concerned with getting enough people in order to be able to work at Hill and get enough people to be able to actually functionally produce the workforce and workload needed to be able to get these aircraft back out. So during this time period, as I knock this over, the region between Layton, like North Salt Lake, Layton, Ogden, all the way up through like Brigham City, Syracuse region, this region grows from maybe 30 to 50,000 people in 1940 to over 300,000 people by 1945. That's a huge amount of growth that happens almost overnight. And with that, we've got people coming in to move to work at Hill, but then we have all of their families. We have the schools being needed. We have the grocery stores being needed. We have the houses being needed to be built, right? And this brings in a huge workforce to Hill. But it was incredibly important, and it was seen as important by the local community. So much so that Hill was seen as the road to victory. Being able to get people to work at Hillfield, this was Utah's place in producing something that would help the United States win the war. As they're doing this and bringing in more and more workers, there are multiple communities that started to rise up around this. So right here, the workforce at Hill grew many, many thousand, but right here, there are communities that start to be funded by federal projects in order to get enough housing built to get more and more families to move here. So the photo on the very far left that you're seeing, this is called Verdeland Park. It is a set of military housing that is located where Layton High School is now. Another example of a military housing community or installation that was created in order to help get more people working at Hill is like Washington Heights, which is modern day Ogden. Washington Heights is still, it's still called Washington Heights. Verdeland Park is no longer called Verdeland Park. It's now part of Layton City. But if you go to Layton High School and you look at the houses around, you will still see several houses that are very clearly of military build. Yeah?
Is that also Washington Terrace?
Yes, that's what I mean. Yes, Washington Terrace. You're correct. Thank you for correcting me. One of my favorite photos here. So I love this because it showcases that this isn't just a bunch of kind of sterile workers coming to work at a plant. These are communities growing up and bringing in children. So this is a photo of a 4th of July celebration in Verdeland Park. And we can see these kids dressing up. I'm assuming it was some sort of pageant. I think it was some sort of pageant around the 4th of July. We see a kid dressed up as Uncle Sam, a kid dressed up as Lady Liberty. Somebody's dressed up as, I think, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But this is part of a community building and growing and kind of growing together. Now, Hill got to be pretty effective at its ability to refurbish and overhaul aircraft. This right here is a production line for the B-24, which there were 3 main weapon systems that Hill was overhauling in order to send them back into the war. The first one was a B-24, which is a type of bomber. The second is a B-17, which is another type of bomber. And the third was the B-25. We had a lot of B-25s and some B-26s that came through Hill for overhaul and maintenance. Hill's production lines, though, at some point they got so efficient that they were able to produce or overhaul, refurbish, and send back out 1 aircraft a day, which might seem like it's slow, but it's not. It's incredibly fast for the amount of work that goes into going into all the technical aspects of an aircraft and retrofitting everything to be exactly like it was as new. We're talking about re-welding old parts. We're talking about fixing up old pieces that have been blasted apart. It is much more difficult to overhaul and refurbish an airplane than it is to build a brand new one on an assembly line. So this was fairly efficient, and there were national magazines that were reporting on how effective Hill was and how effective its workforce was. So in this process, Hill was helping not just basically itself, they also oversaw multiple sub-depots, one of which was Wendover Field. And I'm not gonna steal Landon's thunder, but I will talk about, I just want to highlight that Hill was overseeing the maintenance work at both the depot at Hill, but then multiple sub-depots that were located across the country, one of which was just a few hours to the west in Wendover. And Landon will talk more about that. So, as the war kind of gets to its peak in about 1945, or rather we start to really amp up our efforts towards the war in 1945, despite the fact that's like when the war ends, the workforce at Hill is progressively getting larger and larger, and the workforce does go down a little bit after World War II, but Hill continues to maintain its legitimacy because it offers an opportunity to store aircraft. So even after the war is over, when we're not fixing everything up to be brand new again, we still have this really important place in that we are, once again, high and dry and out of really extreme weathers, which means that we were a really good place to store aircraft. This right here is a line of PT-13s. Down here on the right is a row of B-29s, another type of bomber that Landon will probably talk about. And then in the background, we can see, I love all these old pictures of Hill. We can see Hangar 1 and Hangar 2, but then we can see a line of C-45s, like a huge field full of C-45s, right at the mouth of Weaver Canyon as we're storing aircraft. Okay, so I know part of what I want to leave you guys with before I transfer over to Landon is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. These aspects of the history of Hill and its place in the community, this is just the very cusp of the beginning of how Hill begins to play a role in the history of Utah, because it does not stop with World War II. It starts with World War II, and then it just continues to grow and grow and grow and grow. There are multiple programs that continue to be overseen through Hill's depot maintenance program. The F-16 program, if any of you guys know what an F-16 is or have seen like the Thunderbirds, have gone to see any air shows. The F-35 program now is overseen here at Hill. Hill also they've got explosive ordnance disposal teams that go out and send dogs. They train dogs here and they keep them here, and then they go out and they go check out bomb sites for the president. They travel all over the world. We have ICBM, or Intercontinental Ballistic Missile teams, that are managed here at Hill. The majority of the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile program, which really didn't start until the Cold War, is all managed out of here at Hill. And that supply aspect of supplying the world with basically materiel, which is like just bombs and goods, those are still parts of the mission here at Hill. And last but not least, this big spot here in the middle, Landon will talk more about this, but this is the Utah Test and Training Range. It's 12,000 nautical square miles in the middle of Utah, reaching over into Nevada, that starts out as part of that sub-depot area that Hill is overseeing along with Wendover. And this is now a huge region that allows Hill Air Force Base, along with multiple other branches of the Air Force, along with multiple other branches of the military, to do test and training. So not only that, but multiple other countries in the world who are our allied partners, they also come to the Utah Test and Training Range in order to do different types of training there. This is the second largest military installation in the world. It's huge. And this, along with the ICBM programs, along with our place in national defense now, guys, economically, on the state of Utah alone, in 2024, the economic impact of Hill Air Force Base was $12.7 billion, which is insane. If Hill Air Force Base was to go away today, Utah would not recover for at least another 50 years. So, once again, this is the tip of the iceberg. And I want you guys to just kind of see that this is the roots of where this all begins, but there's so much more that if you guys want to know more, please feel free to come visit at the museum once we reopen, when the federal government stops being shut down. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Landon to talk about Wendover.
Elisabeth, and I have a question with
Yeah.
that map. I'm sorry, I don't want to.
No, you're good.
So where's was like, where's Tooele, or even is it far enough, or is it like right on the base?
Tooele is located next to the Utah Test and Training Range. It's like right in the airspace of the Utah Test and Training Range. So the base is basically like a mile to the east of us from here. It's not very far. It's super, super close. The base itself that houses just that military facility isn't the biggest part, but this base also oversees that huge airspace right there. That's where Tooele is like
So
right along the
here's
80.
the state line with Nevada, so
Yeah.
Tooele is probably right over here.
Also,
Yeah.
Well, makes
And Landon's like right here.
way over there through that large airspace.
Yeah, really good question. Any other questions while he's like, hold up.
Well, Tooele also has, they used to have the munitions, the nerve gas and stuff out there, and then there's still, and I believe it's true, I haven't been out there recently, I think there's still an army base out there.
Yeah, there is.
Yes, there is.
All right. Well, thank you, Elisabeth. That was a great introduction to strategically why Utah was so important. And yes, Hill Air Force Base. Without Hill Air Force Base, Wendover might not have happened. Because we talk about Utah being isolated, Wendover's a different kind of isolated beyond that. We're 120 miles in any direction from the next nearest civilization, really. So to be able to have a depot that close to sustain what we were doing, which was primarily heavy bomber training. So as we had these war-weary and training-weary aircraft, Hill is responsible for those. They're overseeing our maintenance program. And as we had planes crash around the region, Hill was also often running out there and helping us salvage and then bring those back and overhauling those kind of aircraft. So absolutely essential to what we had. But here's one of our favorite aerial views, about 1943 of Wendover Field, just to give you an idea of what this thing became way out there on the border with Nevada. But to give you some background, we're going to go back to the railroad. 1907, the Western Pacific Railroad established Wendover as they were building this new line from Salt Lake City to San Francisco, which would then plug into the hub there in Ogden. So strategically, that was another important point. Without the railroad, Wendover Airfield would not have happened. Again, they would not have bothered trying to get the resources out there to create this base. But it was so significant for the railroad because Wendover is right here. So we've got this nice flat spot. That wasn't a major issue for these locomotives, these trains, as they're crossing the salt flats in these regions. But the big issue is right when you get to Nevada, there was a 1%, over 30 miles of 1% grade, which was difficult to navigate for these trains. So we became a division point where we had maintenance shops to maintain those trains, those engines, make sure they could go. And we had a bunch of helper engines to actually push and pull these important trains as they went over the mountains. So we just had to show off some of the fabulous photos in the Utah Historical Society's collection. We're so grateful for what you have and for how it helps these other sites interpret their history. So I just had to throw this in here because these are fun. The majority of the state legislature went out when this line was completed and said, oh, it's the salt flats, and here's the state line. So they're just cool old photos. So there's our growing rail yard. But the Western Pacific and the railroad during the war was a major factor. So just to share what this was like, in 1938, the Western Pacific handled an average of 399 million gross ton miles of freight monthly. By 1942, very early in the war for the United States, this average amounted to 813 million, so over 100% increase. And then it would continue up. In 1938, the peak month produced 610 million gross ton miles. In 1942, the peak month was 1,041,000,041 gross ton miles. And unfortunately, I don't have later in the war for those measurements, but you can see how much war supplies are going down these railroad lines, including through Wendover and sustaining us and going on to Hill Air Force Base and other installations through the state. In 1943, in a 24-hour period, it was not uncommon for one train to pass through every 48 minutes. These are troop trains. These are mission essential moving supplies coast to coast. and throughout the region. But here we are approaching the war. There is not much in Wendover. We were a little railroad community. There was just over 100 people living there, mainly all working for the railroad. But Elisabeth just touched on the Utah Test and Training Range. Well, that was born as the Wendover Bombing and Gunnery Range. By the late 30s, the federal government realized we are way behind. We've got to increase what we're doing. Because before the war started in 1938, our Army was 19th in the world in size, and it used a lot of obsolete weapons, was not up to date. Our Air Force, under that umbrella of the Army, was maybe 4th or 5th, which sounds a lot better, but there were not that many Air Forces at the time. And we only had about 1,200 aircraft, and they were mostly obsolete at that point too. So we were really excited to have Hill get in there and start helping, keep these bombers flying once we had new ones coming off the lines, B-17s and B-24s. But as part of this effort, they said, we're going to establish a 1.8 million acre bombing range out here through the West Desert up to that Nevada border. Huge area. The biggest issue was fighting ranchers for grazing land. It might have been bigger had some of those fights not happened. So Wendover was established, so it was the largest military reserve in the world at that point, which is staggering. So they stood up this major base at Wendover Field, would become Wendover Army Air Base a little later on, and they were there to manage 1.8 million acres of bombing range. So by November of 1940, we had 50 men on base running this site, working with the contractors to get the actual base stood up. It was overwhelming. One of these individuals, his name was Byron Dusler. There's a fantastic Utah Historical Quarterly article about him and his experience. That poor guy was here from 1940 till 1946. To my knowledge, he probably had the longest stint in Wendover of anyone, and I feel for him. But just to see what this is like. So they're just barely making foundations for some of our barracks. They're starting to grade out our ramp for parking aircraft, installing some infrastructure. And for reference, this is the state line right here. So the first thing you come to in Nevada is the red light district. That's this little town, and then there's the very small area of Wendover and the rail yard. So not a lot to work with. They had to bring everything in. This is one of the photos from the Byron Dusler collection. Yes, sir?
Where was IAE on that thing?
So it pretty well follows the railroad track,
Oh, okay.
and then would come through town right about there. That was Highway 40 back in the day. So these guys are running around standing up encampments and targets throughout these 1.8 million acres. They have major ones 25, 50 miles, 75 miles out from Wendover. As part of this, Elisabeth tapped onto these New Deal era efforts. Well, we tapped into that as well. We were in such a need for buildings, we started procuring portable buildings from local CCC camps to erect them for quick construction for use. So we were getting buildings from Emery County, Juab County, Box Elder County, and throwing them up all around this site just so it can be done faster until we could get more resources brought in. Here's May of 1941. Our ramp's looking better. We are starting to have gravel runways. There's some of our early barracks, tent city, but still a long ways to go. And then we have a parking area. All those aircraft are B-18 Bolos. It was an already very obsolete aircraft by the time the war started, but that's what we had out there for training. But December 1941, things changed for the United States, and by March of 1942, they said we need more heavy bombers to be going overseas, and that's when our capabilities increased. They designated us as a heavy bomber training base. We received that Army Air Base designation, so we had a bit more going on. So we had a blitz of construction throughout 1942. The majority of the base was built in that time. By the end of the war, we had 668 buildings. A good portion of those are already up in just a year. So we had local contractors coming in, putting this up. So there was a lot of business for the local economy that way as well, as well as the other military installations around the state. One of the records we have, one of these poor contractors says, I need at least 400 guys to be doing the work I'm doing. I've got maybe 150, and I'm losing some every day. Terrible attrition rate because I have nowhere for them to stay. So they worked with the farm administration who had trailers at University of Utah, bring some of those out for housing. But they said, we even have guys living in caves around the area that are helping stand up this base. So it was a huge effort, and it was really difficult out here in these isolated areas. But just to give you an idea of what life was like for these folks, we have a little letter from an individual named Marshall Baker with the 306th Bomb Group. He wrote a letter home recording a typical reaction of a GI arriving in Wendover. Private John Doe, after a long and tiresome journey, the last part of which was across no man's land, the Great Salt Lake Desert, arrives at a railroad station at the west extremity of Utah at perhaps 9 a.m. He glances curiously out the coach, and it's not the train that makes him wonder, what the hell have I done to deserve this? This is what is before his eyes. On the north side of the tracks, the village of Wendover. Beside the railroad station, there were a few scattered houses, a general store, a cafe, 2 filling stations, 8 small trees, and the famous State Line Hotel just across on the Nevada side. Now Private Doe, though half-dazed, becomes brave enough to glance to the south. There is Wendover Field, which is by far mostly field. There's a radio tower, 2 runways, 2 B-18s, that old bomber, 4 barracks, and to the east, many rows of beautiful tents. Now, Private John Doe has just come from Keesler Field, Shepherd Field, Fort Logan, or some other well-established camp, and what he sees now makes a most unpleasant contrast. As the GI truck rolls him merrily down to headquarters and later to those beautiful tents, he has sort of a lost feeling and thinks of what a lovely home he has left behind. And tens of thousands of airmen would have that experience as they rolled into Wendover. And I saw a Strategic Air Command cap over here. One of the more notable individuals that served in Wendover was Curtis LeMay, one of those early fathers of the Air Force and our really World War II bomber force. He was there with our first bomb group, the same one that Sergeant Baker was with. His kind remarks were, it was a great place to land and take off, that's all you could say. In fact, you so much as looked, and you wanted to take off right away. But they made it work.
You didn't have a whole lot of difference between Omaha.
No,
Omaha doesn't have anything to,
no.
in that regard.
And all these places standing up, no one could meet LeMay's standards. So our main role was heavy bomber training. So we've got this fantastic photo from Life magazine demonstrating what it takes to operate a heavy bomber. This here's the B-17 Flying Fortress. Elisabeth showed the B-24, so we've covered both now. But here, we were an operational training base or second phase base. These guys are coming from all around the country once they've trained in their specialty, and now they're arriving at Wendover or a similar base where they're assigned to their group, their squadron, their air crew, and they typically had about 90 days to reinforce what they were doing in their own specialty. So we had all sorts of training aids for all these individual programs. They had to learn how to work as a combat crew. What we gather from these stories from veterans is you didn't have to like each other, but you had to be willing to trust each other when things got rough in combat. So they were learning how to do that. And then effective unit operation at all levels, from squadron to group, flying formations, and running effective bombing operations. So it was a terrific area, being located right at that 1.8 million acre bombing range, which lots of other airfields were using. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say one thing too to remember, and I know people have seen the movies on TV and stuff. You're talking about guys that are, an old man that's like 26 years old.
Oh yeah, and some of
You're
these guys
talking about
were,
pilots that are 20, 21, 19 years old, kids that had never been out of Kansas. And so they step off here and they go, it's a lot like home, it's flat, it's hot, or it's cold in the winter, you know, so.
or coming from back east, it's like the
yeah.
surface of the moon hitting that salt flat. So they were thrown right into it. These were some of our training aids, the link trainer, our bombing simulators. We had fancy celestial navigation towers. So it was world class as far as we're concerned. It wasn't the biggest base, it wasn't the nicest base, but we had what we needed to train these folks. But one of our unique features was the Wendover Aerial Gunnery School. In 1942, as we were really increasing the size of this base, the Army Air Force said to us, hey, we need another gunnery school. We don't have the funds right now, but if you could make that happen. Reportedly, within about 3 weeks, they had a mostly functional world-class gunnery range. How did they do it? Well, some of our veterans tell stories of they had literal details to go down to the rail yard and liberate supplies off of trains. Another veteran recounted they would go out to salvage some of these bomber crashes, and when they got there, all the turrets were stripped. I wonder where they went. They mounted them up there as training aids. One of the unique features we had was called the Tokyo Trolley. These guys went all the way to California to an abandoned mine, picked up the actual track, found a motor car, modified it for 330 caliber machine guns. They're moving back and forth, shooting at a moving platform, one of these Jeeps, to simulate air-to-air combat. So it's incredible what they did. The Utah Historical Society has a wonderful collection of these photos. They are such a goldmine of information for what was going on. So we currently have SME Steel of Salt Lake. They are helping us reconstruct the Tokyo Trolley. So when you come visit us, you can actually see that thing in physical condition. But by early 1944, we finished our heavy bomber training. We transitioned to a fighter base, and from May to September, we were training P-47 Thunderbolts, these big single-seat, single-engine fighters. But things would quickly change, and they were essentially kicked out for a much more important mission for our national defense, which was the atomic mission. So towards the end of the Manhattan Project, this effort to create our first nuclear weapons was something called Project Alberta, and Wendover was a huge part of that. It was meant to train the first nuclear capable unit in the Air Force, which would be the 509th Composite Group, as well as do all the final testing and training for all of the atomic components, making sure we had a combat deliverable weapon. So thankfully in everything we did, we never had nuclear material, but they built about 100 prototypes of Little Boy and Fat Man test shapes, and we're working with those out there in Wendover. So this is our B-29 hangar, as we call it the Enola Gay hangar, because people recognize that name. But this was put up in about 4 months for this mission. It's all steel, which was also notable. And these are just a few of the crews of the 509th Composite Group. Now for reference, they were activated December 17th, 1944 in Wendover. 41 years before, to the day, the Wright brothers first flew. And now we have our first nuclear capable unit. So technology did move scary fast, but yes, it would progress faster after.
When you built your first unit 3 years after Pearl Harbor.
Right.
So you've gone from nothing to that, plus the planes went from nothing 40 years before to that.
We had some smart people.
We did.
So the other aspect of Project Alberta, that actually working with the test shapes, making sure we had combat deliverable weapons, we had the 216th Army Air Force Base Unit Special. So they had a flight test section. They had their own B-29s. They were testing the ballistics, all the internal electronics and systems. And then the Special Ordnance Detachment, they're the ones who were actually constructing these weapons along with members of the 509th, so they knew what they were doing when they got overseas. And then they had the fun duty of digging them out of craters to see what actually happened. And something unique we have out there still is our atomic bomb loading pit. We have two. One of them was primarily used, here's a Little Boy bomb, or test shape, being lowered into one of these pits. It was so immense, 10,000 pounds, and Fat Man at 5 feet in diameter, that didn't fit under the plane. And with the weight of both of those weapons, they had to lower them into this pit where there was a hydraulic lift. The plane would park over top, and that's what it took to load the atomic bombs. So all aspects of how to conduct the atomic missions, Wendover was involved in all that. But when these folks were done, or when they had leave, they weren't going to stay around Wendover. So what did they do? They went to Salt Lake, of course. So I just had to share some of the fun photos from our collection. They'd go to Temple Square, Hotel Utah, Kennecott Copper Mine, the Capitol, Black Rock, Saltaire. So they had lots of fun coming to Utah, especially from some of the locations they were coming. Utah is a beautiful place. But another lasting legacy, of course, with that atomic mission, Boxcar flew that second mission on August 9th, 1945. Some of you may not have realized in its nose art, we actually mentioned Salt Lake. I don't think they could throw Wendover in the mix, whether that was for security or they didn't want to remember Wendover. But they had great times in Salt Lake before they departed, so they have the capital. We suspect that's the Hotel Utah. So we took the fight right to them in this manner as well. Yes?
I took your tour out in Wendover about a year ago, and the thing I thought was interesting is how when these guys wanted to come to Salt Lake, how the FBI or the Army sent people to go listen to them when they went downtown. And, and if they said, hey, I'm working out there, and boy, we're doing something really big, all of a sudden they find themselves in, Key West, Florida, wondering how the hell did I get here?
Or
Because
reassigned
they
to Alaska.
didn't want rumors and stuff like that getting going. And that was the thing I thought was interesting when you mentioned that, because I had never thought of that, hey, even nowadays, if people blab their, what is it? Loose lips sink ships, and it's the same thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So a lot of Utahns don't realize that on level of national defense, we were involved in the Manhattan Project. We trained the atomic crews. We had all this going on. So that was our primary World War II record. We had a lot more going on, but those were the big things. So just to show where we're at today, we're now a municipal airport. Military activity, or at least the military installation, is gone. We're still surrounded by the 75th Air Base Wing, Hill Air Force Base, who manages the Utah Test and Training Range immediately around us. So I get to see their F-35s every day, or they'll come out for training every once in a while. But we have something special out there. It is the most original World War II Army Air Force training base remaining in the country. Of those 668 buildings, there's about 90 still standing. And our nonprofit, which was founded in 2001, is fighting to keep those standing, preserve them, restore them, and interpret that history as we can, working in coordination with Tooele County, who runs Wendover Airport. So just to give you an idea of some of the efforts we've done, there's our restored barracks. There's the B-29 hangar. We received a $500,000 matching grant from the National Park Service about a decade ago that allowed us to do a lot of essential work. When our director first went out there, these wooden exteriors where the offices and shops were, they were held on with tow straps. So far we've invested about $2 million into this hangar to keep it standing, and we keep pushing as we can to make this the primary museum space, because this is something that people want to see and should see. And there's the Officers Club, which was in a terrible state, and that's now our primary museum space today. You can come see our beautiful dance hall. We've got music playing. But one of our most recent adventures, in September, we launched a campaign to honor the fallen in training. In Wendover, we have a record of about 100 individual accidents, 135 fatalities. Nationwide, there are over 15,000 airmen killed in training nationwide. Staggering numbers, just for training. But there's no national monument for them. Their names aren't listed anywhere, and because they didn't continue on into combat, they're often forgotten compared to their fellows who were able to continue on and make it overseas. So we are proposing and starting to fundraise for the World War II Army Air Force National Training Memorial to be at the most original training base left, where we'll have a memorial plaza in front of the B-29 hangar, with this featured prominently, a bronze relief with this guy as a statue standing larger than life right there in the middle, and on pillars around that site, the names of those 15,500 men and women who were involved in this aerial training. So that's where we're at today. There's a few terrific articles in the Utah Historical Quarterly about Wendover, so I encourage you to look those up. But that's where we're at. So I'll leave it there so we have a few minutes if there are any questions.
Was Wendover, was gambling there when the airfield was active? I don't recall when they legalized gambling in Nevada, but was there gambling there in Wendover when they were operational?
Thankfully for the service members, there was a casino. The state line was started in the 1930s. So we actually have a photo, or the Utah Historical Society has a photo of Byron Dusler there in the gambling in the casino.
There's a lot of nose art in the 509th, actually.
That's gambling.
Incorporates gambling. It was a big part of what their pastimes were.
Straight
I
flush.
love nose art, and I didn't realize there was a whole bunch of nose art out there.
So that's another thing. If you like the nose art and want to learn more,
Yeah,
the
come
Hill
visit.
Aerospace Museum has a terrific nose art display about the atomic unit.
We just barely had commissioned about 15 different artwork for the original nose art from the 519th. So the Enola Gay is one of them, right? And the boxcar is another, but there's several others. All the ones that are family appropriate have been.
I'll bring up and show you. I've got pins that were made. I was in the International Guard back in the 80s. And they put nose art on all the KC-135s. And somebody went out and made pins, and I purchased them. And like one friend of mine, he ran a plumbing company, and he had a picture on the side of his company of a wizard, and somebody decided, hey, that would make good nose art. And he went into a big statement saying, hey, you didn't ask me, you didn't inform me or nothing, somebody just appropriated it. But I'll bring those up and show you the pins.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Because now when I go out there, it used to be you had the wizard, you had women, elves, whatever, and now it's Utah jazz. It's no, when we've gone into a new generation, it's more neutral, and it's so that nobody feels slighted or something else.
The Air National Guard still allow, the cool thing about the Air National Guard though is that they still allow proper nose art on the fuselage. The Air Force no longer allows that because we don't want any of our aircraft to be identifiable.
Yeah.
But if you do find it, it's usually on the interior of the bomb bay doors.
Oh, okay.
So if you see, there's a couple of examples of that at the little Aerospace Museum. We got an F-117 that was recovered, and it was utilized in Desert Storm, and the bomb bay door has a huge, beautiful painting of what is known as the Midnight Rider. So it's not very commonly outside anymore, but yeah. It's super
Well, there's a lady too that I followed her on Facebook. She donates it. She paints stuff on the tails now, and I mean I've seen. I think there was one thing here in Utah that I saw. But I know she's done stuff all over the country,
That's
and it's pretty cool.
Landon, can you explain a little more why the tents? So they built tents, but they weren't for the men to live in, right?
Actually, for most of the duration, there were always some poor individuals who were stuck in the tent city.
Okay, because you mentioned that there wasn't room for everyone. Why did Wendover ever expand to accommodate? Like, why did Wendover not grow? I'm sure it's grown since then, but it's still very small.
After the war, it shrunk right back. We reached a peak population of about 20,000 individuals, which included 2,000 civilians. So we were employing a lot of civilians. And then after the war, they all left, and it went back to that size of maybe 500 or less in that little community.
Also, it did grow, I guess.
It grew a little bit, but then the side with casinos continues to grow.
Yeah.
Well, having been out there in the 80s and even the 90s, those buildings are still standing, but a lot of times they would also put us up over at the state line or the Nugget, whatever it's called now. And so they kind of flex. And in the 80s and 90s, it would say, okay, we'll put you up over there and we'll give you a meal shit. You can go get your buffet and stuff, Because by that time, the 299s used to go out there an awful lot, the range control squadron. And so they kind of flex, I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine they probably had something like that too, even if you got too many people all of a sudden a surge, because we're Air Force, we do not stay in tents.
No.
We go to motels.
They'd stuff them somewhere. We even had folks living with local families.
Oh, okay.
And like LeMay in particular, at the duration he was in Wendover, he and his wife lived at the State Line Hotel.
Oh, interesting.
They crammed them in where they could.
That wasn't singular to just Wendover too. At Hill, we have records of families that if they couldn't find a place to stay, they would stay in the jail overnight just to have a roof over their head, or there'd be families that'd be moving in. They wouldn't know where to go. So they'd go down, stay by the river bottoms, just to have somewhere that had some type of cover until those communities were built. So I guess the difference is that northern Utah kind of grew. It actually became permanent.
Oh yeah.
Where Wendover.
It could sustain something. Wendover is something else. But that just highlights the sacrifice all these individuals were willing to go through at that time for the war effort. They were all involved.
Yeah, I did an interview one time with a World War II navigator, and he talked about the radio navigation towers and how they went across the west here and to land their planes. But it made me think about Mountain Home in Idaho and how it played a part, or mountain home base played a part as well as maybe some other installations in the west? And like, how are they connected to Wendover and Hill?
So Mountain Home would have been similar to Wendover. It was its own Army Air Base. They were doing their own bomber training. We were the 2nd Air Force, which was responsible for bomber training. There were 4 Air Forces spread across the United States. But of course, they fit within that region as Hill, where Hill is their depot. So it functioned the same way as Wendover.
Just much smaller. And then,
And I don't know what size they were during the war, but they would have been comparable in operations to Wendover.
yeah.
My nephew just recently got his pilot's license, and I was unaware that when you fly cross country, you can actually, they used to use arrows, concrete arrows on the ground, and I'm not sure where they pointed, but they pointed in a consistent direction, I don't know if it was east or west, but when you were flying like from Salt Lake to Denver, and you were low enough, you could see these arrows that would point your direction. I guess there's still a few.
Yeah, there's still quite a few out there, and especially those were used by the airmail.
Oh,
They would have lit beacons so that they could try and navigate, but
Huh.
yeah, there's still some around Wendover and on here to the Wasatch Front.
And they would typically follow the existing rail lines.
Oh, okay.
So as you head south, like to go to California and LA area, you're following the San Pedro line down from Salt Lake to San Pedro through Las Vegas.
Oh.
That was the main air route as well.
Oh.
And you'll have arrows all the way along that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Well, can we give our speakers one more big round of applause? Thank you, Landon and Elisabeth. That was very enlightening, and I think we all learned a little bit more about what made Utah's Desert to Defense such a fascinating piece of our history. So the Utah Historical Society thanks you for joining us, and we hope that you join us for we have one more lecture as part of this series, but this lecture will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel as well as the rest of the recordings for this series. So thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of your evening.